Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tech Leadership Labs Fireside Chat with Cristina and David. We will be talking today about climate, the future, and how does TLL kind of fit into all of this? TLL, for those, I'm using an abbreviation, and there's probably a lot of abbreviations we'll use, but TLL will be referencing Tech Leadership Lab. And then I'm sure David will have a ton of different acronyms and abbreviations, so we'll definitely try to define them all. Some of you may be familiar with them, but I'm sure we'll have viewers who have never heard of some of these terms, and those are the ones we really do want to educate today. So thank you and sit back. With that, I just want to remind everyone as they join to please mute their mics and don't be afraid to turn on your cameras. This is a community engagement, and so we're looking forward to having you be part of our conversation. We're going to start first by introducing our panelists and speakers. Cristina, let's start with you.
Thank you, Carlos. As I was just mentioning, for those who are not in the room, it's the first time when I'm not the host, the co-host. Carlos Restrepo, our CXO, is our co-host and host today, both. And I'm very excited to be here because we have time to talk more about TLL and the stage we entered, and it's so exciting. I am the founder of TLL. Everything started in September 13, just a couple of months ago. It's absolutely crazy, but it took a huge traction. Why? Because many people are telling me because of the voice, the power, the authenticity, the desire to do good, because this is something you cannot fake. And people can sense when you are a future-oriented legacy builder, let's say, and this is one of the factors why TLL just took off, and it's on an exponential growth today to basically do tech for good led by good hearts. This is our massively transformative purpose, or MTP, and it means that we want to amplify leadership and voices and all of those TLLs around the world working relentlessly to solve the SDGs, the 17 SDGs sooner. And we want to do the due diligence and help them grow and find solutions for our future sooner than later.
Thank you, Cristina. And yes, I'm part of TLL, and I'm very excited to be a part of TLL. But I'm not being biased here. Cristina, you've done a great job putting the group together, and obviously we're attracting some good speakers. Speaking of which, David, why don't you introduce yourself a little and tell the community who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Carlos. My name is David Dodd. I founded and run a nonprofit dedicated to increasing climate adaptation capacity worldwide. I was originally affiliated with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. I'm still unofficially affiliated with them. Our specialty is public-private partnerships and using technology to help people cope with the rapidly changing climate that we live in. I met Cristina through LinkedIn. So if you don't think good things can happen through LinkedIn, I can tell you a good thing happened. And Cristina and I hit it off immediately, and then she introduced me to Carlos. And I'm ready. We rely heavily on the use of technology for good, and so I'm so thrilled to be now a part of TLL. And Cristina asked me to be an advisor, and I was honored by that. And so I'm here today to talk about all things resilience, climate adaptation, and I'm ready for the discussion.
Thank you so much. So just some quick kind of things. If everyone who joins, please mute your mics. What we will do today is we're going to get through a presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about why TLL and is involved in the SDGs, sort of how we ended up with this fireside chat. Then we'll talk a little bit to David about what he's doing and how that kind of relates to our purpose and our goals of really bringing technology, community, and humanity into all of this and to resolve the 17 SDGs. After we get through some of this, we'll get into some Q&As. I have a couple of questions that I want to ask, but we will open it up to the community for some question and answer period. And then with that, we'll just close it out with last thoughts and move on from there. If you have questions, I want to thank Chris, who's in the background, kind of helping me with managing people coming in and so forth. So if you do have some questions or anything like that, feel free to post them to the chat. And Chris will make sure I stay on top of any questions that I might miss during the presentation. Thank you. With that, Cristina, let's talk about how did TLL end up here at this fireside chat talking about climate and the future?
Yeah, great question. Complex one, because it was not something planned to just start last year in September. It was something that I prepared for over 2 decades. It was a hard journey of discovering human nature, business success combined. I was super, super drawn into a long form of mission about knowledge, about blending in different industries, understanding different personalities. So what I did during 2+ decades, it's absolutely crazy, because my CV, it's hard to be understood, but for me, it was very clear that if I truly want to grasp a global understanding about who we are as a species at a human level, and also how we can integrate this to grow something that it lasts long, it outlives us, you need to go through that, and you cannot just block yourself inside a box. And so I prepared for this journey a long time, and at some point I just thought, okay, there are so many things that are happening around us in the world, and I'm not young anymore. I have the experience. I still need to learn a lot, but I will do this as long as I live. When it's the time to start something more impactful, when is the time for your legacy mission to start? And it was one of those weeks when I had a deep chit chat with myself, and I said, you know what, next week I will start on Monday. And this is how it started. I announced everything on Monday. We will have a newsletter launch. We will have an event on Wednesday here on LinkedIn. This is all about. And finally, I started to spread my voice, what I believe around things and people, because usually, during my profession, I was not so much a private person telling about my vision, values, because I had others in the background. So it was not my voice. And this time I said, okay, if I want to share something and to shape a better future, I need to also share my voice, how I see things, because otherwise I won't attract the right type of people who are here for the long haul, who care about humans, who care about the children today and what we are leaving to them. And that is the big question. I mean, everything I see happening today, for me, it's linked with the future. This is the way my mind and brain works. I see, okay, what will happen in 10 years, 15 years when I'm not here? What will happen with them? What type of leaders they are following? What are those role models and where our Earth is? And so, it was a progression, because once I started, I said everything will be formed based on the people who join and who align with my voice, because this is not my journey, it's our journey this time. If you want to disrupt and create a global community and governance around with good human-like leadership, empathic, long-term thinkers, then you need to open up and just lead the way, but then let others lead the way. And so this is how everything started. And we are today here to tackle the 17 SDGs because they basically cover what we have today. They can be improved because AI didn't existed then. So AI is around all the 17 SDGs. And this is also something we are talking inside the group. And starting with climate, focusing on climate without getting labeled as a climate entity, but it is the most crucial thing. And that's why we want to go this route and also promote and amplify the voices who are already doing a great job in this, as David Dodd is doing.
So you could say that you're an overnight success that took 20 years in the making?
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned that, TLL is tackling the 17 SDGs, and we're talking about climate. Why did we go with climate? What was it about climate that you saw as the SDG to tackle first?
Yeah, I started to answer this before. I will go a little bit more into this because I had discussions with so many people and with you guys also inside the core team membership. And we decided, okay, there are urgent things. Everything is urgent. Education is urgent. Health is urgent. Poverty is urgent. I get it. And we want to tackle all. I don't know why we still have poverty. It's exactly because of leadership and the money in the wrong hands. That is why TLL is here to just shift that. Because otherwise we wouldn't, with the abundant world we are living, we shouldn't have that. But climate, I mean, digging more in this, we can see this is real, it's happening. And there are multiple dangers that can just happen instantly and that can just vanish human life on this earth. I'm an optimist, and it's not something that I'm saying, oh my God, doomsday is coming. But I'm also a survivalist. I like to prepare. I like to know what is happening, because even if I take the best scenario in mind, okay, if some disruption happened, what am I doing with myself, with my family? Am I that leader who, if it's the supermarket when the people jump in and they just are jumping all over the others to take the last toilet paper? Am I that leader who does the same thing? Or I jump on a table and I say, hey, people, stop. Breathe, relax, we can do this. That is important. And so when you get to climate, it's exactly that. You want people just to see the potential, because there are solutions that can still help us. There are multiple solutions, not just one, not just two. And David is here to attest and say more about these things. But we need to act. Everything that Yuan did in this regard, it's absolutely salutary and it's impactful and important. We just need more speed. We just need a little bit more startup-ish kind of vibe, entrepreneurial vibe to move some things. And so we can help here, just amplifying what was done, what's not seen, and what we can do sooner. Because we don't have that kind of much time to meet next year and say, okay, these are the issues. Not everyone did what it should. Let's meet next year, because there is no real accountability. And so things are delayed, and there are many, many aspects from climate. So basically, to just conclude, if we don't solve this sooner, then we need to go underground, underwater, or on Mars, some who could. Otherwise, it won't be a livable Earth for humans. It's not about the Earth, it's here about our survival as a species, if we can live on the surface of this Earth, or we need to find something else. And in this regard, we don't have too much time, but we have solutions. And this is something we need to tackle yesterday. That's why it's the priority.
Thank you. And I think that that's important for everyone to kind of understand that at TLL, what we want to do is amplify voices, amplify impact, right? And we want to bring people on who are working towards solutions that many may not know about. And that goes to sort of some of the work that David is doing. And so, David, as you think about climate and what's happening and the critical factor that is now, where do you see us now in terms of like what you've seen over the past 20 years in your experience, and sort of what is the criticality of environmental issues and adaptability and so forth, ESG programs today, and where do you stand on that? You're muted, sir.
I think someone muted me. I didn't realize I was muted. My journey started in August of 2005. I was in Mexico. My background is economic development, and I focused on sustainable economic development, which was not really in vogue, still not really in vogue in some circles. But I was stubborn about that, and I was in Mexico teaching sustainable economic development. And I walked in a hotel that had, at that time, a novelty. They had a GPS that projected onto a screen. You could look onto the screen and go anywhere in the world. I mean, that was a novelty in 2005. And I saw the Gulf of Mexico, and the entire Gulf of Mexico was taken up by this huge storm. And I said, something bad's going to happen. And I sent a message to a friend of mine who was the Secretary of Economic Development for the state of Louisiana in the U.S. And I said, what can I do to help? 3 days later, he sent me a response. Get your bleep to Baton Rouge now. That's the state capital. And so I did. And I ended up helping craft the economic recovery strategy that turned into legislation to help the economy recover. So that's kind of my niche, is economic recovery and resilience, but I do all types of resilience. I was just on a call this morning with an international technology firm. So we're developing 2 different apps. One app for the disabled. I'm disabled myself. I lost my left leg while doing disaster recovery in Puerto Rico. And so I'm very, very aware of that need. And then we're doing an app for vulnerable populations who are often completely left out of preparation for disaster education. And we're trying to reach them. There's something, a really neat statistic. So, and I heard this on a conference that a virtual conference that I attended, and there's a gentleman from Africa. He runs the largest cell service in Africa, and he said 20 years ago, 75% of people in Africa had never heard a phone, not used a phone. They never heard a phone. Now, 75% of people in Africa have a cell phone. I mean, that's amazing. And what that does is that technology enables us to reach more people than ever in places that are chronically vulnerable and underprivileged, but we can still reach them, and we can reach them with the messages. And so I am all for 1,000% carbon reduction. Absolutely. But the fact is that while we're doing that, and we're doing a very poor job of it, while we're doing that, we have to adapt to what's already happening and what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years. And Cristina made a good point. You know, we will get very quickly to the point that certain parts of the earth are not inhabitable anymore. The International Organization for Migration is predicting the largest migration in human history over the next 30 years due to climate. So how do we deal with that? How do we inform people about what they need to do to be prepared? So the sad fact is that of all climate investment, 93% goes toward CO2 reduction. I'm all for that, but only 7% goes to adaptation. That has to change. That has to increase dramatically. And so what I've done is developed a mechanism that I offer through my nonprofit to show impact and ESG investors a defined rate of return, both a financial return and a social and societal return for investing in resilient infrastructure and systems. And that is being offered now in partnership with the World Association of Public-Private Partnership Professionals. So we are trying to change the paradigm.
David, so a couple of things that I picked up on. One, your boots on the ground in your disaster efforts and working with disaster relief. I mean, you know, as you mentioned, and when we talked before, your story about how you lost your leg in Puerto Rico during one of your efforts, and so not only are you kind of speaking high level, your boots on the ground doing it as well. We talked about Hurricane Katrina and being at the Astrodome and the experience you had then.
Superdome.
And so,
Superdome.
The Superdome.
Astrodome's Houston. Superdome.
Yes. Sorry, Superdome. Yep. New Orleans is going to come after me now. But so one, what I like is that you have, you know, kind of the theoretical elements too, in terms of how to implement some of the recovery elements and stuff. But then you've also been personally hands-on. On top of that, I think that it's important for our audience to really understand the concept of adaptability. And what does that mean in terms of climate? And why are we talking about 93% going to carbon reduction versus the 7% going to adaptability, and how does that impact, let's say, what happens in climate action over the next 3 to 5 years?
The reason that there is that discrepancy, Carlos, is really simple. There has been no defined return on investment for investing in adaptation. There is for investing in clean energy and environmental, because that produces revenue. So what we had to do was say what we want to base our appeal to investors on is reduction in losses. If you can reduce losses, which now hover around $1 trillion a year worldwide, total economic loss, which is not often counted in the official numbers, that's damage. So there's damage and there's loss. And for economies, the loss is greater for interruption in business than it is for actual damages. So you have a greater loss through businesses not being able to operate, employees not being able to get to the business. So that's a huge problem. So what we've done is we said, if we can reduce those losses and we can convert that into revenue, then we can turn around and provide a return on investment. So we do that through an insurance-linked security, which is similar to a catastrophe bond. Let me explain that quickly. Catastrophe bonds, you purchase the bond. If an event happens and certain parameters, they call it parametric insurance, are met, then that bond pays. So it's a very complicated risk scenario that they develop. So what we do is we say, okay, let's use that same logic, but let's turn it on its back. Let's get the investment first. Get the investment in resilience before the disaster happens. Then when it does happen, and there are certain places in the world, and we factor in the likelihood of a disaster. In Louisiana, a hurricane over the next 20 years is an absolute 100% will happen. There's no doubt about it. Now, there are places being affected in ways they've never been affected. There have never been hurricanes in England. Well, guess what? England had hurricanes. There's never been hurricanes in California. Guess what? Southern California was hit by a hurricane. So this is going to continue to evolve. We have no way to stop that. What we can do is increase the investment in helping places and people be better prepared. And that's what we're all about. And technology is the backbone of our crusade. It absolutely is. We use technology to help communities make their economy more resilient, their infrastructure more resilient. We have a learning game for kids ages 6 to 10 that teaches them about resilience. That's all relying on technology. So absolutely, we must. And one more thing I'll say, Carlos, and then I'll let you speak. Carlos knows if he lets me go, he has to interrupt me. One thing that's really, really important is that the SDGs, climate is embedded into 2 SDGs, but climate impacts all of the SDGs. How can you eliminate poverty when people are being displaced and put out of their homes, or they have to move somewhere where their skill set may not be applicable? This is the crucial crisis of our age. And it's going to cause more conflict. It's going to cause, more people to suffer if we don't adapt now. And my motto is adapt or perish, because I absolutely believe that.
Cristina, I'm going to bring you in on this because David made some comments that I think align well with what your vision is, right? You mentioned technology is key. He's looking at educating younger generation and kind of helping them kind of bridge their perspective into action in some ways, right? And then David touched on how climate is not a singular SDG, and in general, one of the things we've talked about in Tech Leadership Lab has been the idea that a lot of the SDGs are interconnected, and by tackling one SDG, you are impacting other SDGs, right? And so maybe, your perspective on how Tech Leadership Lab kind of comes into this, supports it, And sort of where does that kind of help, build into the future models of what maybe a lot of NGOs, startups, and other organizations are working on?
Yeah, another in-depth question, and I'm very happy that David started this, and he said something I forgot, and we will use this in our messaging, that yes, climate impacts all the other SDGs, not just because if climate just makes our inhabitants here on Earth impossible, but because even if it's possible, this kind of discharge of people and the climate refugees that it's expected now to be around 1 billion people during the next decades, 1 billion people. Just imagine. That is much more than any war can cause, just because the absorption rate of immigrants is very tough. It's hard to do. And many times it's not well proportionate. So it just destroys countries, economies. Because if you go into an economy and you create 10% of the population or more, in some cases, you cannot be absorbed properly. And so you will have disruption, you will have criminality, you will have an economy that is just destroyed overnight. And plus the shift to include different ethnicities. We are all about here to be inclusive, to be like a global governance where it doesn't matter your location, your age, your gender, your sexual orientation, your titles, those doesn't matter. It matters who you are as a person. But still, we have today a lot of division and disruption because it's much easier to rule if you have bad leadership through division. And exactly, we are doing the opposite. We unite. But back to your question, just imagine what will happen with those people who lose their homes, they lose their islands, they lose their countries. And so they need to relocate overnight. That impacts everything. And one of my favorite topics, I could say, because I started to, together with my AI assistant that helps us in everything, I created a how to become a climate expert in 2 weeks. David, you can laugh, but I am not a climate expert and I won't pretend to be, but I want to be knowledgeable. And as a polymath, I now value a lot all the tons of information that is coming to me and I need to process. One of which is this permafrost aspect that just fascinated me during the last days. And that's basically, for those who don't know, it's the soil that was frosted or iced for at least 2 years. And inside you have a lot of organic matter. And if there is a warming up, then that kind of soil becomes fluid. And through fluidity, that will just go into our waters, or the organic material goes out, and we have the bugs that will start to live again and eat that organic material, and that will form the methane. And from there, it's a huge, huge element that can create climate warming. But an interesting aspect is that the organic material includes dinosaur bones and materials from we don't know how long, millions of years, with some unexpected illnesses, viruses, bacteria. We don't know, we never experienced. So if COVID was a disruption, imagine some things, viruses coming from the dinosaurs into our days today through water. So this is a health issue and it can get global. COVID showed us what can happen if something just disrupts us through transportation and in a global community, and how your world shuts down in a second. I mean, I cannot even imagine when just a couple of years ago, people needed to stay in the house. They were like under surveillance in hospitals. I mean, that was absolutely a shocking experience. We don't even recover yet from that. And this is just one of the first aspects. And then, of course, all the other SDGs have that same linkage because it will disrupt everything. And if I might add, another interesting aspect I was just starting studying is and David, if you can just add here, because I don't know many things, but the geomagnetic storm impact. That's something that it's exactly connected with your resilience aspect, because if we don't prepare, and our internet gets shut because of just the high energy flow from the sun, and we have the satellites, everything that can just be shuttered, and we stay in a second without internet, just imagine our world wouldn't be happy. So technologically, we need to upgrade our systems in a way that location-based, they are secure from such geomagnetic storm impacts. And I would stop here, but there are many aspects that just open me up to the possibilities and what we have to face.
That's
And
a
I think
very
that's a
important
good,
point. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
well, and I was just going to say, I think that was a good kind of example of how SDGs are not isolated, right? You know, that sustainable development goals do have an impact on multiple kinds of elements. There was a question that came in from, I think it was Denny. Oh, Andy. How could you persuade people to believe climate change brings loss to the economy and business? And so when we talk about climate, we talked about migration of 1 billion people, and Cristina talked about being able to absorb that. I mean, you see when 100,000 refugees come to a country, the impact that has on the economy. Imagine 1 billion people moving all over the world. What kind of impact that would have to the economy, right? But then on a more practical level, you have sort of the work that you're doing, David, with helping businesses understand that if they're, you know, when we think of profits, there's ways to maximize profit. You can increase your revenue, right, and your margins, or you can reduce your expenses connected to your revenue, right? And so if your expenses are outseeding your revenue, you're going to fail as a business. And when you start having to deal with climate changes that are impacting business resilience, how do you demonstrate that to businesses? How does your application work to demonstrate that investing in climate, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are several different ways I could answer that. I want to reference what Cristina talked about because it's so important. This mass migration, and any of you that are either from the U.S. or hear the U.S. news, you know there's a crisis at the southern border of the United States, and it's not people immigrating from Mexico. The vast majority of people are immigrating from Central America, right on the equator. And a good portion of those are immigrating. They're trying to find some way to survive because there are parts of Central America right now that are uninhabitable, that will not produce crops. That's why we're having a crisis. That's one reason why, one of the big reasons why. So the other thing is that, you know, looking at the investment that needs to be made, you have to personalize it for businesses. And so you have right now the Panama Canal, because of climate change, has dried up to the point the lake that feeds the Panama Canal has dried, that only about 25% of the ships that usually go through the canal can go through the canal. So what are they having to do? They're having to go around the tip of South America. And there's conflict causing that same thing in the Red Sea. And we all know about that. We all watch the international news, and that's causing traffic to have to go around the Horn of Africa. And
So
so
we've kind of
these
been
are
set back 100
impacts.
years.
These are impacts that are directly impacting businesses of all sizes, of all shapes, all around the world. So if that's not enough to convince people that there's a problem, I don't know what is. And again, bringing it down to the personal level, to the business level, even if you're not damaged, if your employees cannot come to work because there was a disaster that is either impacted them directly, or maybe the transportation system has fallen down and they can't get to work, that's going to impact you in a huge way. So the way to convey that message is to say, what would you do if let's say a tornado? They never had tornadoes in Europe. Now they have tornadoes in Europe. Think about that. If you've ever experienced a tornado, and I have, you know that it's the most destructive thing in the world. It's more destructive than a hurricane. Why? Because tornadoes form like that. They form very quickly and can be every bit as destructive as the most powerful hurricane or cyclone. So how do you cope with that as a business? If you're hit by a hurricane and you're in France, you've never dealt with anything like that before, that's going to possibly drive you out of business. The sad fact is that in the US, FEMA acronym, Federal Emergency Management Agency, by the way, FEMA has a book of acronyms. They call it the BOA, the book of acronyms. That's how bad they are. I worked for them. I mean, I worked for them under an agreement for 10 years. So anyway, they say that when a major disaster occurs, 40% of businesses will no longer be in business. Of the remaining 60%, 25% of them won't stay in business more than 2 years. That's the impact. That's, you cite that to a business person and they say, wait a minute. Well, a disaster's not going to happen here. You want to bet? You want to bet? I mean, I'm selling basically through this technology, I'm selling the equivalent of insurance. So when you buy a life insurance policy, what are you betting on? When you buy a car insurance policy, what are you betting on? You're betting on you're going to die, and you're betting on your car is going to be destroyed. Because there is a risk of that. And we are using the same principle and using a very complex algorithm to predict the reduction in damages that can occur through purchasing resilience, which is basically insurance.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about the state now, right? And I like to think about the future and what the potentials are and so forth. But one of the conversations we had around being able to set up for the future was PPPs, public-private partnerships. And as I was doing my research, there are some concerns around public-private partnerships just in the way that they've been implemented up to date. And so we had a nice conversation the other day with Cristina about PPPs. Could you let me know sort of like what are the challenges that a PPP faces? Why are you a proponent? And you see I'm using a lot of P's there, so I'm probably popping my P's. But what do you see? Why do you advocate for PPPs and see that as something worthwhile, and even to the point where you're going to be speaking about it at a UN event?
I am a person that focuses on the future, not on the past. And in the past, it's absolutely true that a good number of PPPs in the past, especially in developing countries, were corrupt. There was money handed under the table. The private sector investor or developer made an exorbitant profit. I am a proponent of next generation PPPs, and next generation PPPs were developed by the International PPP Center of Excellence at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And they advocate for 5 things. Number 1, transparency. How do you do transparency in PPPs? It's called blockchain. And everyone gets blockchain and crypto mixed up. Blockchain is not crypto. It's a methodology of verification along every step of every transaction. That is the solution for transparency. The other one is equity. Are you building a PPP to help those that are underprivileged, or are you building a PPP that's going to just help the wealthy? The third principle is stakeholder involvement. That is so important. The people that are impacted must have a say in how that public-private partnership is implemented and what the project is. And that's the 4th thing, is fit for purpose. Don't build a boondoggle. Don't build a bridge to nowhere. And that has happened. It's happened in the United States.
Yeah, there's famous examples of that.
Absolutely. And so all of those things point to one thing: no corruption, zero corruption. And then the last principle is where I come in, and that's sustainability and resilience. And my center is called the International Sustainable Resilience Center. What is sustainable resilience? It's building resilience with the least impact possible to the environment or to the climate. And I have one of the foremost sustainability experts in the world on my team for that very reason. So those are the values that not just me, but the entire group, including the World Association that I'm involved with of public-private partnership professionals, including the UNECE, and these standards that I'm going to lead the drafting of are going to lay out exactly what needs to be done to sustainably make infrastructure and systems that are financed through PPPs resilient, and they're expected to be followed. So that's what we're doing. We're changing the dynamic from backroom deals with a lot of corruption to totally transparent and stakeholder involvement, anti-corruption, pro-people, pro-environment, pro-climate.
Well, I think that that goes to the nod to Christina's be leaders with good hearts, right? And the idea of transparency and what does a good heart represent?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is a very important aspect because I just can't believe how we don't have a system, a global system. And this is one of the things I would love to see with the help of AI to filter that no person, no human on this earth should lead millions and billions or take decisions for huge, a big number of people, and also have resources and know what to do with tons of money if they don't just pass this human like character test. And this should include for psychopathy, sociopathy, narcissistic tendencies, and also going in the back. It's easy to just know if you reflect back and just go through a history of a person. You don't want to let leaders to govern over countries, over corporations, over big entities with huge influence and power, who already proven or who were not tested if they truly love humankind. I mean, we have people who hate humanity and they are open about it, and they are leaders and they are talking that it would be better without us. And you want them to take decisions that would save humanity. And so we should have a system of filtering that you put in top of things, just the good-hearted, human, empathic, like long-term thinkers that are having a good heart for us. Otherwise, we won't find the right decisions, or we find them, but because we don't unite and we cannot agree, we cannot create consensus, then nothing will happen. That's why it's so important.
Well, Christine, I think if you don't mind, I'd like to pick up on what you said, because what I see, what's happening is totalitarianism is gaining extreme popularity around the world, and that is driven by one thing: it's driven by change and fear. And so the world is changing more rapidly, not just the climate, but all aspects, AI, all of that is changing the world very rapidly. So these people exploit that and create fear. And every one of the totalitarians has an enemy. Just like Hitler had the Jews, that was his enemy, and the enemy's going to take us over if you don't appoint me as your ruler, then these guys are going to take over. And that's the fear. And it's coupled with, I hate to use the frame ignorance, but ignorance means you don't understand. You don't understand what is happening. So you automatically have fear, and that is turned into hatred by these authoritarianism figures. And I don't know how to stop it. I wish I did. I mean, climate's going to be the least of our worries, I'm afraid. As serious a crisis as climate is, I think that's an even bigger crisis. And addressing it's going to be a difficult task.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of interesting conversations around things like that, and obviously the millennials, the Zoomers, and the alphas, I think, are going to have a big say in how the world turns, right? How the pendulum is going to swing. And so educating the younger generation, bringing to, I mean, I don't know how many people were aware of some of the efforts around adaptability and, you know, the PPPs and what good they can bring. So I think raising awareness is one of the things, right? Bringing community together and then using technology in a way that shows it's not scary, because a lot of people are scared of technology. They are scared of, you know, Terminator kind of future, right? Or the HAL 2000 kind of thing, right? And so I think that what I liked about getting involved in these fireside chats is the idea of exposure. And that's one of the things we really want to do. So other organizations that are out there that have projects they're working on that just they want exposure, that are doing good, you know, let us know, because we want to highlight them. With that, I want to move into some Q&A and just make sure we cover any questions. Chris, I know I addressed, I think we talked about Andy's question. Are there any other questions that came in that we should answer?
Yes, there was another question, and I was just about typing mine as well. So Daniel has a question for David, which is what innovative strategies could be implemented to increase the focus and funding for adaptation measures in sustainable economic development, especially considering the disproportionate investment in CO2 reduction compared to adaptation?
It's all about one thing. It's about educating people. It's about informing people of the dire need for us to adapt. And the numbers are there and they're readily apparent. I am almost overwhelmed with data that comes to me because of, you know, I'm on certain contact lists, etc. And it's about doing things using technology. That's what we're trying to do with disabled and vulnerable people. But everyone needs to know this. When you have leaders, government leaders saying climate change is still a hoax, when it's readily apparent that the climate is changing more rapidly than even the most pessimistic scientific predictions, then it's merely a matter of showing them the numbers, showing them in black and white what this is and what it's doing to us and what it's doing to not only businesses, but people, and pain and suffering and death that is occurring around the world because of climate, and our inability to recognize that adaptation is an investment. It's not an expense. That is the absolute, and technology can facilitate that and allow us to reach those people that need to understand what this is and what the implications are and why we must adapt.
Okay, thank you. Layla, you have your hand up.
Hi, David. It's such a pleasure to have you here. I just want to thank you for the wonderful information that you provided to the group so far. Now, in regards to adaptation, you said that 7% is being directed towards adaptation currently. If we wanted to move in the way that TLL hopes for, a rapid transformative move towards working towards these goals, how much should be directed towards adaptation versus some of the other things? Like, what is the ideal number in your mind that would really help us move the needle?
So thank you for that question, because it's important for everyone to know this. So the United Nations Environmental Program published a report, Too Little, Too Late. Google it. It's a great report. And it talks about the adaptation gap. The adaptation gap for 2023 is $235 billion a year, not a one time, a year. By 2030, it will be 135 billion, not 235. By 2030, it will be $240 billion a year. A year. I mean, please understand that, everyone. This is the gap that we're facing in adaptation investment. So my ideal is to raise adaptation investment to 50% of total climate investment without impacting investment in CO2 reduction. We don't reduce that, but we increase adaptation investment so that it's equal to, and that's what the Secretary General of the UN said. He said we are in a crisis of epic proportions and we're not dealing with it. And so, you know, there's some, I used to be a voice in the wilderness. I've been doing this longer than a lot of people, 18 years, but now that's not the case. And that's a great thing. So hopefully we can make an impact. We have to, and we can use technology to do it. And you guys are key to that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, when we talked, you also mentioned some another number that started with a T.
$1 trillion in losses, $1 trillion in losses a year. So that's 1% of global economic output. So if we're not growing as a planet at 1% a year in economic output, we're going backward.
And I think that's important in the big scale of things in terms of understanding the amount of money that is being lost compared to the amount of investment that is needed. So, you know, we could prevent $1 trillion of loss if we invested 240 billion in in the budget for that. So
yes,
I think that's a, hopefully people can understand, you know, if you're going to invest a quarter to save $1, you'll do that every day kind of thing, right? So Greg, you have your
exactly
hand
what
up.
my technology is about. That's absolutely. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
My turn.
Yes, sir.
I really appreciate everything that you're saying here, and I agree with everything too. The approach that I'm taking is to match available funding for climate emergencies to effective solutions. And I'm scratching the surface, but that's my plan. The groups that I became aware of recently, a year and a half ago when I ran our second Green Economy Conference, we had a third one in November, is to become aware of two organizations, one called the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero, 415 signatories, 130 trillion with a T, $1 trillion committed to climate solutions. And then a smaller subgroup called the Net Zero Asset Managers, which is about 300 signatories and about $69 trillion. Have you heard of those groups? Are you working with them? Could we work to approach them together?
I certainly am aware of both of those groups. The problem is they're 100% focused on net zero, which I believe in, but that doesn't help us in adaptation. I certainly think that the more quickly we get to net zero, the better off we're going to be. There's no question about that. But in the meantime, we have to deal with what is. One organization I would recommend to you is the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, ASAP. It's a great organization. I'm involved in leadership in that organization, and I'm happy to facilitate getting you on board if you're interested. Any of you, it's a great organization. So anyway, I'm all for that, but that doesn't help. That doesn't help the adaptation cause.
Well, so it might tie in the comment that you made before about reducing losses instead of generating revenue. That seems to me an approach that a business person would appreciate, especially since both of those organizations are backed, or at least the GFANS one is backed by former Mayor Bloomberg of New York City.
Right.
Have you approached him or maybe his Bloomberg Philanthropies group?
It's so funny. I'm in the process of doing that right now. I made a couple of connections, and that's the first person I wanted to go to with this.
Okay, absolutely. Good deal. I think also the Ellen MacArthur Foundation also is a funder of green solutions. And I just was on now I'd encourage everybody to watch a 60-minute video on quantum computing that was just recently released, and the amazing computing power that's bringing to the table, and it's being applied to the SDGs and also to climate solutions. So I can find that and post it in the chat.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
I saw that in the chat, and I lit up. Christina's probably going to laugh at me, but there's 3 technologies that I said are going to change the face of the world in the next 3 to 5 years. Quantum computing, cold fusion, and blockchain. Blockchain for the reason, David, that you mentioned. People think blockchain, they think crypto, but it's not. It's a public ledger. And that public ledger creates transparency that has never been available before.
Exactly.
And so that is going to start holding people accountable for their actions and for what they say and do. So that's going to be amazing. And then quantum computing, all of this effort in AI, all of this effort in 3D printing and modeling, which I think is going to completely change the industrial age, because now you have on-demand printing and so forth.
Right.
Quantum computing is going to be huge. And then cold fusion with some of the techniques that are being developed so that you can actually generate energy. And I've heard people talking about some others. Cristina shared a video with us about someone talking about the energy inside the planet Earth. But I think cold fusion right now, with the amount of leaps forward they've been making the past 9 months, from powder coating, the generators to other things, it's amazing. And so I think that these 3 things are going to change. And I'm so glad, Greg, that you brought up quantum computing, because it is going to be a huge benefit. And now that they have, actually someone was able to crack room temperature quantum computing, that's, because that was one of the key elements in terms of how do you keep the quantum computing cool enough without all of the green impact it has. So
I've seen that technology and it is amazing. So what they do, instead of cooling the room that the servers are in, they go directly into the servers where they're housed and they cool that. So they don't have to cool a room down to 68 degrees. They just cool the components, the housing of the components to 60. It's like 95% less energy. It's amazing. So these are the things that I think are going to address some of these issues. I want to key on one thing that Cristina said that is really important. This issue of solar flares and solar energy is a crisis now, because the same thing that weakens the ozone layer, that lets more sunlight in and more warming the earth, that same principle makes us weak to be able to defend from solar energy coming in. And that's a huge danger. And it's something that no one talks about. I guess it's because there are more urgent things, but that is, just like an asteroid hitting the earth, that could wreak havoc if that happens. And every day the atmosphere is weakening, every single day. And the microbes as well. I mean, that permafrost, melting of the permafrost, that is 10 times more, methane is 10 times more destructive than carbon, 10 times. And all that methane gas from all of those organisms, like you said, the dinosaurs, they're going up into the atmosphere right now. It's happening.
And you get the flywheel effect of further and faster.
Exactly. And that's what's happening. That's a great point, Carlos. That's what's happening, is as it's continuing to move forward, it's increasing in speed. It's momentum. It's simple, physics. And the other thing that's a big problem that we are already facing is the melting of the polar ice cap and the melting of the Antarctic and the breaking off of glaciers that get into warmer water and then they dissolve. That's doing this to the sea level. And we have places around the earth. There's a map that was developed that shows these places around the earth that without rapid change, they're going to be underwater in 50 years. New Orleans is one of them, by the way. So if anyone wants to buy a house, I've got one for sale.
I live in Florida, so yeah, I understand that. So we're coming to the end. Obviously, this has been a great conversation. I think, Cristina, you're okay to stay a little late. David, are you okay to stay a little later? Because I think that there's been a lot of conversations. Also, I know, Cristina, you always like to leave our conversations with a call to action. What do you think today's conversation has kind of created, or what kind of call to action would you want our audience to pick up on? And then David, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Okay.
Yeah. Today's discussion just showed me that we need to go more in depth. We will have our first official big event that, let's call it a summit, but all the rest you will find out in March. So you can already put this in calendar. Between 19 and 21, we will have our first big event. That's it. For that event to happen, we want to see how we can do it in a way that it's actionable. That's the number one priority for us, not just talk, but action. How we can put things together, bring the right type of entities together in order that we move the needle after that. It's obvious that climate has so many little details, and you just mentioned them, the most important ones. I could even add, because super interested in what's happening, Earth's magnetic field. We didn't even discuss that. Then your favorite, Carlos, with the super volcanoes. And that even if we have global warming, and that's a huge issue, we also need to think that there are separate entities that will say, what global warming? Because it's very easy to disrupt the attention from the right things if you have interests for yourself. And because you also have some evidence that might look wrong for the other side. For example, Europe, based on this Earth magnetic field shift, and also there is a term about the, let me just check, because the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, and that is something that always helped the continents to move, circulate the warm and the cold, and that if it shifted just a little bit, it will put Europe, where I'm based, in an ice age very quickly. So Europe is cooling, okay? And so many voices could say, what global warming? But things are changing, and that is why we have hurricanes and tornadoes in different parts of the world, because everything just shifts with a couple of degrees. That is huge on a global scheme of things. And so when we have and address this many issues that can scare and say, what's the point? We will die and we cannot do anything about it. We can with technology, we can with AI, we can with quantum computing. Also, because of what I said about the geomagnetic storm impact, if we take in consideration that we save that quantum computing facility and it won't be hit by sun and the wave, that's also very important to consider. And this is David territory, where we need to adapt and put things securely where they can. We have so much infrastructure. We have so many bright minds and technology around the world. Countries in Europe, I mean, even Germany and Sweden, they have pipes where they include and combine technology. They combine the wind technology with water technology for energy between countries. This can go on a global scale. Things are happening if you're studying them and you say, wow, people are doing tons of things, but we don't know them. We need to connect the dots. And this is what we want to do, starting in March, with a focus on climate, but also bringing AI into the equation, humanity into the equation, and community aspect into the equation. We need to unite with the right type of leadership, create consensus documents, put them on top of every streaming media outlet that wants to take them. And if not, now we have the power of the youth who wants this to happen, and we can spread them through social media everywhere, because it's basically their future we borrowing now, and we cannot mess that up. And this is what we want to do. And so if you feel that this is something you want to be implied and implicated with in any capacity, get in touch with us, because now we are getting big, we grow exponential with the right type of mindset. I believe that we can move the needle, bringing the right voices to unite and impact. And just keep close to us, obviously, subscribe to our newsletter on LinkedIn, come to our Wednesday events, and just keep connecting with us, engaging, because we are moving fast and we are on the good side here. Yeah.
Thank you, David. And I know we have a couple of people with your hands up. As soon as we get through David, I'll go back to hands up.
I'll make this brief. I think the answer is action. And if this group commits to action, I think we can move the needle. because there are so many people that talk about, and then there are the few people that do. And so I'm hoping that this group is going to be the group that does. I could go into 10,000 other things dealing with adaptation and the need for it, but I think hopefully that message has been conveyed. And use technology, use it to convey the message. Get the message out that we have to adapt. Please, I'm begging you. I'm not too proud to beg. I would get on my hands and knees, but it's hard to get up when you have an artificial leg when you're on your hands and knees. So I'll leave it at that and leave some time for questions.
Okay, Greg.
I just want to ask you, I do plan to join the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. And if you could just comment on one thing. I saw a video maybe 9 months ago by a woman, I don't remember her name right now, I think she's in the San Diego area, who is part of the adaptation professionals. And she cited the statistics saying that people who are involved in the environment and climate emergency for a couple of decades now, the early adopters, are suffering from the same effects as healthcare professionals during COVID, in that the future is so grim that they're stressing out and leaving the profession. Is that your experience too?
That's such an important point, Greg. And I saw you post that and I meant to mention it. Climate anxiety is the fastest growing mental health issue in the country, in the US, probably around the world. My guess is that it could be even worse in places like Africa and developing countries. And this is real. And especially younger people are so depressed about the future because all they hear is we're all going to die. And I don't discount what Cristina said. I think she's right. There are parts of this planet that are going to become inhabitable if we stop all carbon today. And that's going to cause tremendous amount of strife and crises and conflict. But what we have to do is reach those people that have that anxiety and say there is hope. And hope is achieved through one thing, through action. So join us and act and become bold and say, we have to stop this. We have to adapt. We have to stop carbon. Do it. That's the only answer. That's the answer to getting out of a depression, is to act.
Agreed.
Thank you. No, it's sometimes, the only way to control the future is to take control of it.
Yep.
We have to create the future.
Right.
You have
Take
to
control
create
of
the
it, or
future you
it will
wish.
control you. Yeah. Control it, or it will control you.
Layla.
Okay, so first thing, I was born on an island, and I remember the first hurricane that we ever experienced on that island, which was the island of St. Croix. And I remember going, because we moved to New York literally the same year, almost the same month that the hurricane happened. And I remember going back 15 years later, and there was still destruction from the hurricane, because especially when you live in places that you have things like hurricanes, you have different building standards that people can't just afford to rebuild so quickly. So adaptation and how to do that with limited funds, or how to do that when you are an individual within that community, is a very key question. And I wonder what your experience in that is. That's the first part. The second part is, do you guys remember during COVID when it had been about a month in and most of the world had kind of stopped, and we saw nature rebounding? We saw oceans looking clear and stuff like that. How can they say we're not a factor when, in just us not being a participant for like 3 weeks, we saw the world start to rectify, readjust itself? You know what I mean? I don't know where that video is, but we need to circulate that, because people need to remember what it was like. We were all shocked to see, like, wow, that river, big difference between, and it was just weeks. It was just weeks. It wasn't even some long period of time. I think that people think for our actions to count, it has to be some long period of time. But if we stop being jerks, for no other word, right, we can really see this affect nature and see nature do its thing, because nature is powerful. It has so many strategies to maneuver around things, right? We can see it bounce back. And then the third little point is, you mentioned about the insurance aspect. I'm an insurance agent. How can I help you with that? How can we make people think about this in a more comprehensive way? Is like, tell me, how can I become a carrier for you guys? What can I do to help you promote that idea and have people get these catastrophe bonds that can really save their lives and their businesses when something happens?
Well, that's a multi-part question, so I'll try to address the first one first. That's exactly what we're trying to do with this. It's not just an app; it's an entire series of technologies that we're utilizing to reach vulnerable populations, low income, developing economies that just don't have the resources. We're trying to equip them. We're trying to help equip them. Okay, give them the information that they need and where to access resources, because there are resources, but often people don't know how to access them. So that's what we're trying to do for that. The second point is self-explanatory. I mean, you were making a great point about COVID. And the third point is, you're in the insurance industry. You know, the insurance industry is also in a crisis because they are suffering losses year after year because of climate, and they're retreating. Insurance industry is retreating from places. It's very difficult to get an insurance policy, either any type of hazard policy in Louisiana. Florida is almost non-existent. Florida had to stand up their own insurance company by the state. The state stood up an insurance, and we've done that in Louisiana too. So the best thing to do is to I'll enlist you as a champion for this investment tool, because if we invest in adaptation, the insurance losses will be less. It's that simple. And so I have this instrument I developed with a company called Amwins. It's a specialty insurance provider that does a lot of cat bond issuances, but they are also doing this. So very excited about that. But I'm happy to have a side conversation with you.
I'm a
Cristina,
TLO member, and I'll connect with you on LinkedIn. And so we'll definitely conversate.
Yeah, just anyone that has more questions or wants to have a conversation, just connect with me on LinkedIn. That's how I met Cristina. That's how all this happened. Was I reached out to Cristina and I said, "Hey, you look interesting."
Yeah, and also because of COVID, because during that time, lots of amazing connections happened. And so we know each other for 2-3 years now because of COVID that united us in a most unexpected way. And Laila was right. The blue sky, I just put it in the comments because I recall those images from China, the blue sky, and from other places where they didn't see a blue sky in ages. And it was absolutely amazing.
So I know we are over, and I just want to make sure that we're able to end it. So I see some hands up. If everyone's okay to just get a couple, but these are the last 2 questions or comments, and then we're going to wrap it up. Okay.
And again, you can always find me on LinkedIn if you have other questions.
If there is any place you want people to go and just find you.
LinkedIn.
Okay, good.
The easiest thing. Yeah, LinkedIn.
Perfect.
Daniel.
Hi. I have a thought that I want to share with all of you based on the conversation. What will we do if we know we are not going to fail?
Excellent. Love that.
That's a big question to answer.
Well, it's kind of a rhetorical question. I mean, if you know you're not going to fail, you're going to shoot for the moon. You're going to take bold action, and that's what we have to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's
this is my invitation.
Oh, okay. I think that I would go for the good things. So, okay, finally I can create the earth the way I want to. And I would just go to innovate. I wouldn't be scared. and I would just invest on all of those things that make people happy. And this is an important word. Many people disregard this, but yeah, you don't need like to be in the la la land all the time. Balance and Zen mood, it's very fine. But just make a competition about making people happy, having your life happy, doing things you love, enjoying life, connecting for all the right reasons, right? And having that green, I mean, the lashes of the world and the beauty of this world, because this is one of my motivators. I want the kids to see what we saw in our childhood. We are lucky. I mean, I consider myself very lucky at 45. I went through so many things, including communism, and I have such a huge baggage of knowledge and experiences around life, and huge snows, you know, as a child, and just digging inside the snow, things that today are not exactly the same way, and then just traveling around the world, knowing people everywhere and seeing cold, warm, different kind of scenarios, aspects of the world, seeing the beaches that will disappear in a couple of years. So this kind of things I want to preserve and enjoy for myself and for you guys and for the kids and for the future generations. So I would just innovate everything I can in this direction.
I want to play real quick. I know
we're going to change the name, Carlos, from the Earth or the world to Cristina. So where are you in the world? No, it's where are you in Cristina?
I know I'm the host, but I do want to play in this question because my goal then would be, if I knew I wasn't going to fail, I would bring quantum computing and AI and cold fusion together with 3D printing of all kinds of materials to create the first replicator. You know, if there's Star Trek fans out there, imagine being able to have a replicator that could create food, that can create resources, or, you know, from molecular structures and bind them to form new things. I mean, alchemy, the idea of being able to be a true alchemist would be amazing, right? And so that's what I would do, and then replicate that for everyone so that there would not be hunger or the sense of shortage, you know, the concept of not having as part of driving the economy and so forth. And yeah, it's a little crazy, and the economy would change and people would still find ways to put other people down, but we would resolve so many issues and hopefully reduce a lot of the stressors associated with SDGs. So a replicator would be an amazing thing to do, Danielle. That would be my thing.
Thank you.
Jason, you're the last one to speak today before our panel closes us out.
Don't really have a question. I just wanted to say thank you very much, David, for coming over. I mean, definitely enjoyed what you bring to the table. Appreciate Cristina for bringing this up. Carlos, you've done a fabulous job. And David, I did put in the message, and I didn't want to sidetrack the conversation earlier. So on the tail end of this, what I really want to reach out to you about is the dream that I've got with IDRAS, the International Disaster Rescue and Search Team, and with the vast knowledge that you have, as far as, because unfortunately we're not going to be able to stop it quick enough that there's not going to be other natural disasters. Yep. And what I'm really interested in trying to do is use all of the technologies available to pull a cohesive unit for a quick reaction task force, using all of the technologies, the robotics, the drones, the exoskeletal systems that can reduce the unfortunate loss of limbs and other things, so that we can have a quick reaction task force. So I'd love to pick your brain more.
I'd love to talk with you about that further. Absolutely. Let's connect. Where are you from, Jason?
I am in Tennessee.
Yeah. I thought that was the accident.
I was down in Louisiana. Go ahead. Sorry. I was down in Louisiana for a brief stint back in the summer for the wildfires, also with a sister that we're with.
Well, I want to say something to you. You are the true heroes. The first responders they're beyond heroes. There's not a term adequate to describe people that run into the building that's burning instead of out of it. And I deeply, deeply respect what you do, and I would love to have that conversation with you. Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
All right. Wow. Okay. That gets powerful. David, last words?
I think, I think we've pretty much summed it up. Inform people, educate people, take action, use technology. That's the answer, guys, is technology. Use technology to inform, educate, call people to action. It's the only way we're going to get out of this. And adaptation, please spread that message. 7%, that is criminal. It's criminal. We have to increase investment in adaptation. And I'm one of many that are trying to do that. But we have to. We don't have a choice, guys. It's not a choice anymore. And I really deeply appreciate the opportunity to be on.
Thank you, David.
David, have you heard
Cristina,
of
I think it's appropriate for you to close us out. And for everyone who's here, if you haven't done so already, remember you can save the chat. If you go into your chat window, there's going to be 3 little dots. You can hit on the little dots, and then it'll have an option for save chat. And you'll be able to save all of the information, because I'm sure many of us didn't get a chance to read all of the different comments. So feel free to do that. And Cristina,
you love
last
to
words.
do this. You'd love to do this. I don't like endings, so I will be very brief. We need to keep on going and do these things, because this was such a pleasant discussion about serious topics with amazing people. And this is one of the top priorities, to just keep the conversation, make people know, and meet you next time close to us to continue what we started. Until the next time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.